The wind sliced through the darkened streets of rural Virginia, carrying with it the cold bite of winter. The snow had begun to settle lightly on the pavement, turning streetlights into halos that flickered in the mist. Mercer crouched behind a row of parked cars, gun trembling in his hand, his breath rising in sharp clouds. He had done jobs like this before. He thought he understood danger, but something about tonight felt different. His employer's instructions were clear. Grab the woman quietly, get her out, and don't ask questions. Simple, or so he had believed. He had waited in the shadows for over an hour, watching her exit the small convenience store with slow, deliberate steps. Her coat was dark, almost blending into the night, but there was a presence about her that demanded attention. Not a friendly presence, not one that invited conversation, more like a storm that could hit without warning. She moved with purpose, her hands tucked inside her coat pockets, and her head held high despite the freezing air. His finger tightened on the trigger. When she stepped closer to the edge of the street, he made his move. Swift, silent, precise. He pressed the cold steel of the gun against the back of her head. "Stay still," he whispered, his voice shaking despite his attempt at calm. She froze, but she did not panic, not in the slightest. She leaned slightly toward him, just enough to whisper in a tone that sent a chill down his spine, "You picked the wrong night." His pulse surged. There was no fear in her voice, no hesitation. It was as if she had been waiting for him all along. His instincts screamed at him, but arrogance and desperation kept him frozen. Then, moonlight struck the inside of her sleeve, revealing a faint but unmistakable tattoo, a trident wrapped in a ghost-shaped insignia. Recognition slammed into him like a train. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. Stories. He had heard the stories whispered in military bars and covert circles, the SEAL ghost. She didn't exist, or at least no one had proof she did. Missions erased, medals unrecorded, vanished from all official records. Legends claimed she had walked behind enemy lines, rescued hostages, disappeared for weeks, sometimes months, and returned without a single scratch. Nobody alive dared cross her and walk away. "Ghost," he whispered under his breath, fear tightening his chest. The woman did not move. She let the seconds stretch, letting him feel the weight of the silence. "You shouldn't have come for me," she said, her voice low but steady, carrying a quiet authority that seemed to vibrate through the air. His mind raced. He knew that name. He had heard it in the quiet corners of bars from men too scared to say it out loud. Hart. Lieutenant Commander Hart. Or, as the world had come to fear in whispers, the SEAL ghost. Every man who had crossed her path and survived told their stories in fragments. Some said she could kill without leaving a mark. Others said she could appear in a room without a single sound. None of them had ever looked into her eyes. And now he was. The gun felt heavier in his hand as panic set in. Every scenario he had rehearsed evaporated. This wasn't a woman who would scream, beg, or freeze in fear. She was calm, too calm, a predator disguised as calm. The trident on her wrist, simple yet intricate, confirmed what he already feared. His employer had sent him after a myth, and myths were never gentle. For a long moment they stood there, the wind carrying the faint scent of snow and gasoline from the nearby convenience store. His thoughts spiraled. Why her? Who would risk crossing a ghost? The contract was lucrative, yes, but nothing worth this terror. Sweat slicked his palms. One wrong move, one twitch, and he wouldn't live to see tomorrow. "You have exactly 30 seconds to decide what you want," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Realized she wasn't bluffing. She hadn't made a move yet, and that was the most terrifying part. The calm before the storm was always deadly. The world seemed to shrink around him. Each sound, the distant bark of a dog, the scrape of tires on wet asphalt, his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, felt amplified. He wanted to run, to drop the gun, to disappear into the shadows, but instinct and training held him in place. He had been trained for precision, for efficiency, for survival, but no training could prepare him for a ghost. Then, almost imperceptibly, she shifted. Not aggressively, not threateningly, just a subtle adjustment of stance. A mere inch, but in that inch felt the weight of inevitability. Every instinct he had honed over years of contracts screamed at him. His target wasn't a civilian. She wasn't anyone he could overpower or intimidate. He tried to speak, to recover some shred of control, but the words stuck in his throat. I didn't know, he stammered. The admission sounded pitiful even to him, but the truth was undeniable. He had been careless, and now he was at the mercy of someone who didn't need mercy. Her lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile, not kind, not cruel, just knowing. She lowered her voice almost to a whisper, yet every syllable resonated with authority. "Do you want to live, Mercer?" The name, spoken with absolute certainty, made his stomach drop. How did she know? There was no way she should know, yet every nerve in his body screamed that she did. Sweat ran down his temple. The gun wavered, his grip weakening. He had faced dangers in combat zones, life-threatening missions across the globe, but nothing had felt like this. Fear rooted him to the spot. In a movement almost too fast to register, she disarmed him. The gun skidded across the icy pavement, landing yards away. Stumbled backward, his mind unable to process what had just happened. This woman, this legend, had moved faster than he had even seen possible, and now she was standing in front of him, calm, poised, deadly. "You should have stayed in the shadows," she said, her eyes locking onto his with unwavering intensity. "But now you're here, so we'll see what happens." His world narrowed to the chilling reality. He had pressed a gun to the head of a woman who could erase him from existence without a second thought. And worse, he had realized it too late. The night seemed to close in around them, shadows stretching unnaturally long under the flickering streetlights. Each passing second increased the tension, a silent countdown of fear and inevitability. Had always thought he understood danger. Tonight he understood that some forces, some legends, were beyond comprehension. The Seal Ghost wasn't just a name. She was an experience, and he was living it, seconds away from becoming another whispered story of the ghost who walked unseen. And in the distance, beyond the mist and streetlight, the world carried on, oblivious to the encounter unfolding in silence under the cover of night. Realized fully, utterly, that he had made a mistake that would define the rest of his life. And Hart, the Seal Ghost, wasn't about to let him forget it. Long before Mercer's trembling hands pressed a gun to her head, Hart had been forged in a crucible of discipline, danger, and betrayal. She had grown up with a fierce resolve, a need to prove herself in a world that constantly underestimated her. From her early days in Annapolis to her grueling Navy SEAL training, she had survived obstacles that would have broken most men. Excelled not because she sought glory, but because she demanded perfection from herself. Every failure was a lesson, every success a tool sharpened for the day she might need it. Her reputation in the SEAL community had begun quietly, almost anonymously. She was the type of operator who could vanish into any environment and accomplish her mission without leaving a trace. Afghan mountains, Southeast Asian jungles, Middle Eastern deserts. There was no terrain she could not navigate, no enemy she could not outwit. The CIA and Joint Special Operations Command called her in for high-risk hostage extractions, counterterrorism strikes, and missions so sensitive they existed only in whispers. Her colleagues, few who remained in her inner circle, called her the Ghost. It was a title earned, not given. She had disappeared behind enemy lines for 47 days once, extracting 20 hostages while leaving no evidence that she had ever existed. Entire towns spoke of a mysterious figure moving through conflict zones, appearing and disappearing at will, yet no record of her presence remained. Even among the military elite, speculation swirled. Some said she could kill a man silently while standing in plain view. Others whispered that she had no need for cover at all, that she simply was untouchable. Life had not been defined by fame, however. It was defined by loyalty and betrayal. A covert operation in Eastern Europe had ended with a fellow SEAL turning against the team for personal gain. Had watched comrades fall, men she trusted with her life, betrayed by someone who had sworn the same oath she had. That operation ended successfully only because skill was unmatched, yet it left scars deeper than any battlefield wound. She had witnessed the fragility of trust, the fragility of loyalty, and she had vowed never to rely on anyone again. Years of covert missions had honed more than just her combat abilities. Learned to anticipate human behavior, to read subtle tells in posture, tone, and gaze. She became a master of deception, understanding that survival depended not just on physical skill, but on knowing what people expected her to do, and then doing something entirely different. The rumors about her became legends because they could not be disproven. No one knew where she had been, no one could account for the mission she had completed, and few ever saw her return. She existed in a gray zone, half real, half myth, and that uncertainty was a weapon. The betrayal that haunted her, however, was not just from an enemy abroad but from someone she had once trusted implicitly, Director Hale. A mentor turned manipulator, Hale had promised autonomy, respect, and mission control, only to attempt to use her as a pawn in a larger, morally corrupt agenda. When she discovered his plans to exploit her skills for operations that violated her moral code, she disappeared. She erased herself from the system, severing ties, contacts, and any trace that might lead back to her. The world assumed she was dead. Some mourned, some moved on, but those who truly knew the danger never stopped wondering if the ghost had vanished or was simply waiting. His disappearance had been methodical. She liquidated her accounts, abandoned her official residence, and relocated multiple times under aliases. Each step was calculated, each decision reinforcing her new existence as someone who could appear and vanish at will. The seclusion was necessary, for enemies, like Hale, never forgot the operator they once tried to control. Even whispers of her survival were enough to instill fear in those who had underestimated her. And yet, despite her careful planning, fate had a way of drawing her back into the world she had left behind. Mercer was only the first ripple of the storm she would face tonight. The streets of Virginia, silent under winter's breath, had become the stage for an encounter that would force to confront the past she had meticulously avoided. As she stood under the flickering streetlight, her mind briefly revisited memories of her missions. The snow-covered peaks of Afghanistan, the heat of desert villages in Syria, the humid, suffocating jungles of Southeast Asia. Each operation had honed her reflexes, sharpened her senses, and instilled an unshakable calm under pressure. That calm was evident now as she silently assessed, calculating the risks of every move, every shift in posture, every tremor of fear. Her eyes narrowed, studying him with clinical precision. Was not a highly trained operative, but desperation often mimicked skill. He had the edge of unpredictability, yet he lacked the composure that defined survival at her level. Knew instinctively that he was no threat if she maintained control, but she also recognized the danger of underestimating him. Every operator had a breaking point, and tonight she would test his carefully constructed facade. For the briefest moment she allowed herself a thought not of strategy but of regret. The world she once served had grown darker, filled with men who sought profit and power over principle and loyalty. Those she had trusted were gone, replaced by faceless contractors and shadowy directors with agendas beyond comprehension. And yet her skills remained. Her mind, body, and instincts, honed to perfection, were hers alone. And tonight, they would prove that even in a world filled with deception, some legends could not be controlled, captured, or destroyed. Stammered, attempting to regain his composure. I don't know, I didn't know, he muttered, his voice barely audible over the wind. Panic radiated from him, tangible, almost visible. Gaze did not waver. She was a storm contained in a human form, a predator evaluating her prey with precision. The gun that had once been a tool of power in his hands now seemed irrelevant, almost comical, given the situation. "You've made a mistake," she said finally, her voice calm but carrying an unspoken weight. "One you may not survive." The cold winter night seemed to grow heavier, shadows stretching unnaturally long across the snow-dusted pavement. His breaths were shallow and fast, his body frozen between fight, flight, and the dawning realization that he had pressed a gun to the head of a woman who could, and would, destroy him with ease. Hart, the seal ghost, had re-entered the world of men tonight, and Mercer, like so many before him, had underestimated the legend in front of him. Time slowed as she considered her next move. One wrong step could turn the encounter deadly, but patience was part of her arsenal. She had survived entire operations on the edge of annihilation. This was just another test, another puzzle, and desperate and terrified had already fallen into her trap. In the silence between them, his mind ran through contingencies. Capture, interrogation, information retrieval. She had done it all countless times. Each plan was meticulously calculated, each response rehearsed 1,000 times in her mind. Fear, palpable and raw, was just another variable. She had long ago learned that fear could be weaponized, manipulated, and measured. Tonight it was a tool, not a liability. The snow continued to fall, thin and cold, masking the world around them. Streetlights flickered, shadows danced, and the night held its breath. Hart, the woman who had vanished from history, now stood face to face with a man who had made a fatal mistake, one that would ripple through both their lives in ways neither could yet predict. And for the first time tonight, Mercer truly understood. Some legends are not born, they are forged. And some ghosts never truly die. Mercer had always considered himself a survivor. Life had carved its marks into him, sharp and unyielding. Born in a small town in Ohio, he'd grown up with a chip on his shoulder, learning early that the world didn't reward the faint-hearted. His father, a Vietnam veteran, had instilled discipline but little compassion, and his mother had vanished when he was 10, leaving only a memory of warmth and a void of trust. By adolescence, had learned to rely on himself, and on no one else. Military school followed, and then the Marines. Excelled, not because he was extraordinary, but because he had no alternative. Discipline became habit, fear, a manageable companion. He survived boot camp and deployments that claimed the confidence of many, carving a reputation as reliable, adaptable, and capable of thinking on his feet. Yet beneath the uniformed exterior carried a restless streak, a hunger for more than what the system allowed. After leaving the Marines, attempted to enter private security contracting, believing his experience would secure him lucrative assignments. Instead, he found himself navigating the murky, morally gray world of black market operations and mercenary work. Here, loyalty was currency and betrayal was inevitable. He had made choices, some questionable, some outright dangerous, in exchange for paychecks large enough to keep him alive but never enough to give him peace. The job in Virginia, tracking the woman in the flickering streetlight, was one such assignment. Had studied the photo carefully before leaving. The client had given him only a name. Target is high value, keep her alive, quick extraction, payment upon completion. No other information. He didn't need it, he thought. He had survived on instinct and tactical knowledge before. He had planned for surveillance, escape routes, and contingencies. He hadn't accounted for her. Now pressed into the icy street, the reality of his mistake hit him like a fist. The calm in her eyes, the subtle dominance in her stance, the almost imperceptible aura of controlled danger, it was suffocating. He realized that the stories were not exaggerations. The seal ghost was not a legend because of rumor. She was a legend because she was real and lethal. For a moment considered fleeing, dropped the weapon and run. He had done it before, survived, escaped. But instinct and pride held him in place. Fear mingled with arrogance. Perhaps he could bluff his way out, perhaps he could regain some semblance of control. Yet every thought was met with the undeniable truth: he had already lost. The weapon in his hand was no longer a shield. It was a tool of his impending humiliation or death. The snow fell in silence around them, and for a brief, tense interval, imagined the countless ways he could have ended up dead by her hands. All the nights he had spent planning, training, surviving, all of it could end here. One twitch, one misstep, and his life could be over. He wondered, not for the first time, if he had overestimated himself. His presence was suffocating, precise, absolute. She was not threatening in the dramatic sense. She did not shout or lunge. Her threat was inherent, a combination of experience, skill, and cold, calculated patience. Felt it radiate from her, pressing down on him more effectively than any gun or grenade ever could. His hand shook. He realized in that moment that he was not dealing with a target, he was dealing with a force of nature. His mind raced. He had been deployed in high-risk operations, faced insurgents, snipers, and armed gangs, but never anyone like this. She carried an aura of inevitability. The seal ghost's calm, the tattoo that marked her as untouchable, the stories whispered by men too scared to say her name aloud, all converged into a single, terrifying realization. He had been sent to kill, capture, or extract someone far beyond his capacity to handle. I don't know what this is," stammered. His voice shook. The gun in his hand felt heavier, colder, more absurd. He had been trained to face fear with courage, danger with strategy, but this was neither. This was myth walking into reality. The seal ghost had become flesh, and he was trapped in her presence. Tilted her head slightly, observing him as if reading the open pages of his soul. Years of training and missions had taught her to detect fear, deception, and weakness in a heartbeat. Desperation was raw, exposed, tangible. She could smell it, she could use it, and she did not hesitate. In a motion so fast it blurred, her hand moved, and its weapon was no longer in his grasp. It clattered across the snow-covered asphalt, sliding a few feet away. The shock of it, combined with his sheer astonishment, rendered him speechless. He stumbled backward, catching himself against the hood of a nearby car, the reality of his mistake pressing down like a weight. "You think this is about the gun?" asked, her voice quiet, almost conversational. Yet every word carried the threat of immediate consequence. "You've made a mistake, one you won't forget." Swallowed hard. I didn't know," he admitted. "I didn't know who you were." His eyes narrowed. That admission, weak as it was, confirmed everything she needed to know about him. He was inexperienced in the ways of legends, unprepared for the weight of myth made real. The world he understood, the contracts, the threats, the mercenary rules, did not apply here. He had wandered into a story far larger than his life, and the first chapter was closing fast. The night around them felt heavier, charged with tension. The faint hum of distant traffic, the scrape of snow beneath the wind, even the faint barking of a dog in the distance, all seemed muted under the gravity of the moment. Realized painfully that he was no longer in control. Survival depended not on the gun in his hand, but on the woman who now held dominion over the encounter. Hart's mind, however, was already calculating the next steps. One error could be fatal, but patience was her ally. She had survived worse, navigated death with grace, and emerged unscathed. Tonight was no different. The man before her was not a threat to her life. He was a variable, a tool, a warning to the world that even in shadows, the ghost moved unseen but unrelenting. His knees shook. He realized the full magnitude of the situation. He had been sent after a myth, and the myth was standing right in front of him. Every survival instinct screamed at him, yet he found himself rooted in place. His life, his decisions, his very being, now depended on the mercy, or strategy, of a woman who could erase him from existence before he even understood the consequences. The snow continued to fall, dusting the street in muted white. The wind carried the promise of a long night, one that would alter both their paths forever. Shaking, finally understood what legends meant. They were not just stories whispered in barracks or hidden in classified files. They were truths, alive, present, and terrifying. He had pressed a gun to the head of the seal ghost, and now he was at the mercy of a force beyond comprehension. The first lesson of the night was clear. Mistakes in the presence of Hart were fatal, and this mistake might be his last. Mercer awoke to a sharp ache in his temples and the unfamiliar chill of an abandoned cabin. The musty scent of damp wood filled the room, mingling with the faint trace of snow and smoke from the dying fire in the corner. His hands were bound behind his back, the coarse rope biting into his wrists. Panic surged, but it was tempered by the slow, deliberate presence of the woman he had once held at gunpoint. Hart, the seal ghost, stood across the room, her posture relaxed yet radiating lethal focus. Every movement, every subtle shift, carried authority and realized instantly. He was no longer in control. "Good morning," she said, her voice low, almost conversational, yet every syllable carried the weight of command. Her eyes scanned him, assessing, calculating, measuring fear and truth with surgical precision. His throat tightened. In the glow of the fire, he could see the shadow of the trident tattoo on her wrist, and the stories he had heard crystallized into terrifying reality. "You have questions," stated, reading his thoughts before he could speak. "And I will answer some, but first, I need to know why you came for me." Swallowed hard, the taste of fear bitter in his mouth. I was hired," he admitted, voice wavering. "A contractor, he said, to bring you in alive. That's all I know. I swear I didn't know who you were." Tilted her head slightly, letting a moment of silence stretch between them, long enough for the weight of her calm to crush his composure. "Hale," she said finally, more a statement than a question. The name hit like a brick. "Director Hale," he echoed, his voice cracking. "Yeah, that's him. He said it was a clean operation. Payment up front. He didn't tell me anything else. I swear." His jaw tightened. The name carried the sting of betrayal, the shadow of unfinished business. Hale had once been her mentor, the one who had promised autonomy and respect, only to manipulate her for operations that violated her moral code. She had trusted him, and he had tried to use her as a pawn. She had vanished because of him, erased herself from records, hidden from the world. And now he had sent someone after her. "You followed his orders blindly," she said, stepping closer, the firelight glinting off her eyes. "Do you understand what you've done, Mercer? You've crossed a line, and lines I don't forgive lightly." His heart pounded in his chest. He knew it was true. He had acted out of desperation, greed, and the false confidence of experience. But in the presence of Hart, those traits were meaningless. He had pressed a gun to the head of someone who could dismantle him before he even knew what hit him. The truth settled heavily on his shoulders. He was at her mercy, and she had no intention of wasting the moment. Circled him slowly, her movements precise, every step deliberate. "Hale wanted something from you, something you didn't understand. That's why you were sent here." Her eyes bore into his, unyielding. "And now, because of him, you've become my responsibility." Swallowed again, fear and relief warring in his chest. "Responsibility?" he asked, voice trembling. I'm not supposed to be your responsibility. Quiet," she interrupted, her tone ice cold. "You are alive because I allow it. That is responsibility enough for you to comprehend." Her words hit like a hammer. Realized that survival was no longer about skill or training. It was about obedience, about proving himself worthy of living under her judgment. The room fell silent again, filled only with the faint hiss of the dying fire and the occasional creak of the wooden floor. His mind raced. He had been trained to think, to react, to strategize, but everything he had learned in the military or as a contractor was irrelevant here. Survival required something else entirely: cooperation, truth, and the recognition that Hart operated by a set of rules he could barely comprehend. "You will tell me everything you know about Hale," she commanded, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching him like a predator studying prey. "And you will do so truthfully. Any deception will end badly for you." Nodded quickly, swallowing hard. Yes, I will. Hale, he's building something, a unit. A Black Ops team, they operate off the books. I know they're planning something big. He wants someone with that's why he sent me. He said you were the missing piece and he needed you alive." His expression hardened. She had known as much, suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed the scale of the threat. Hale's plan was more audacious than she had anticipated. This was not a random contract. It was a strategic move to exploit her, to manipulate the legend she had become into serving someone who had once betrayed her. "And if I refuse?" she asked quietly, almost rhetorically. Swallowed, knowing the answer. He He doesn't tolerate refusal, he said. He said I should expect failure, but I didn't know it would be like this. His eyes softened for the briefest moment, not with mercy, but with acknowledgement of the human element in the chaos. Was not inherently evil. He was desperate, greedy, and traits that could be exploited, yes, but also traits that could be turned to advantage. She had survived betrayal, ambushes, and combat, yet she still understood the value of lives caught in the crossfire. You are alive because I choose to keep you alive, she said, repeating the phrase like a mantra, a warning and a lesson all at once. And because you may yet prove useful. Hale underestimated me, and he has underestimated you, but that ends tonight. His mind spun. He understood now that he had become a pawn in a larger game, a game that involved Hale and forces operating in the shadows of global power. He was terrified, but within that terror was a small, fragile seed of resolve. If he survived, he might yet have a chance to redeem himself. Continued, her gaze unwavering. We move soon. Hale has no idea that I am aware, that I am prepared, that I will strike first. You will accompany me. Your knowledge may save your life, but your obedience will guarantee it. Nodded again, swallowing hard. Yes, I understand. I'll do whatever you say. His attention shifted to the fire, her mind calculating, planning, and anticipating the coming confrontation. Hale had made a critical error. He believed that heart could be manipulated, contained, or subdued. He had forgotten one truth. Legends could not be controlled. They were wild, unpredictable, and often deadly. She glanced back assessing him one last time before they moved. Follow my lead. One misstep, Mercer, and you will not live to regret it. For the first time, felt a sliver of clarity amidst the fear. He was no longer the hunter. He was the hunted, the follower, and the witness to a force beyond comprehension. Yet he was alive, and for now, that was enough. Outside, the wind howled through the night, carrying snow and shadows across the quiet countryside. Inside the cabin, a plan was forming, strategies were being considered, and the quiet storm of heart, the seal ghost, was ready to strike. Mercer had entered a world far beyond his understanding, and there was no turning back. The past had caught up with, the threat was imminent, and the night was far from over. Hale had underestimated them both, and soon he would learn the cost of that mistake. The seal ghost had re-emerged, and Mercer would walk the line between survival and annihilation under her guidance or her judgment. Tonight, tables had turned, and the ghost was in control. Heart moved through the night with a predator's precision, her eyes scanning every shadow, every glimmer of movement. The abandoned cabin had served its purpose, a temporary holding space, a place to assess and plan. Mercer trailed behind her, bound by fear, obligation, and the subtle understanding that survival now depended entirely on her. The truth about Director Hale, whispered through panicked confessions, settled heavily in his mind. Hale had not merely sent a contract. He had orchestrated a plan to manipulate her into compliance, to weaponize her skills for a secret Black Ops program operating beyond any oversight. The snow outside crunched softly under their boots as they approached a waiting vehicle. The night air was frigid but barely noticed it. Her mind was alive with calculations, contingencies, and the intricate web of deceit that Hale had spun in her absence. Years ago, she had dismantled parts of his operations, cutting away corruption, stopping human rights violations, and exposing illegal missions. Hale had disappeared from her life, or so she thought. Now he was back, more dangerous and ambitious than ever. Struggled to keep up, his fear translating into clumsy steps that betrayed his inexperience. "Where are we going?" he asked, voice tight, still rattled from their encounter. "Somewhere you won't survive alone," replied, not turning to look at him. Her words were not cruel, they were a fact. Hale had built an empire in the shadows, and she had no illusions about the scale of his operations. "Hale wants to use you, Mercer, but for now your role is simple: follow orders and live." Stomach churned. Follow orders, live. The term seemed almost arbitrary, yet he understood the unspoken threat. One misstep, one incorrect movement, and he would become just another casualty in the wake of Hart. He swallowed hard and nodded. He had learned a hard truth in the past hour. Legends were not human in the conventional sense. They were force multipliers, capable of bending reality to their will, and was no exception. The vehicle they approached was unmarked, reinforced, and silent. Opened the door, letting slide in first, a subtle gesture that confirmed his subordinate role without cruelty. Inside, the interior was survival essentials, communications gear, and storage for tools she might need. She took the driver's seat and glanced back her gaze piercing and unwavering. "Hale is reconstructing the unit I dismantled years ago," she said quietly as the vehicle hummed to life. "It's worse than before. This isn't just another Black Ops cell, it's a network, a shadow army. They operate internationally, beyond oversight, beyond consequence. And they've set their sights on exploiting me, on making me a weapon against people I once swore to protect." Swallowed, realizing he had stumbled into a level of danger beyond anything he had imagined. Why me?" he asked, voice trembling. "Why send me? I'm not like you." His eyes flicked to him briefly, assessing, measuring, weighing the answer. "You are expendable," she said finally. "Your skills are irrelevant. Your survival depends on your obedience. You were a tool, and tools are used for the convenience of the wielder, but mistakes happen. You survived because I allowed it. Consider that lesson number one." The vehicle moved through the quiet roads, snow brushing the windshield, streetlights flashing past in a muted rhythm. In the cabin behind the seats, his mind raced. He had thought this mission would be another simple extraction. He had not anticipated a living legend, an operative who records, rules, and reality itself. Fear mingled with awe. He understood, perhaps too late, that his life was now intertwined with a bond forged not in trust but in necessity and raw survival. His mind was occupied with the bigger picture. Hale's network had grown exponentially, incorporating rogue operatives, disavowed intelligence agents, and mercenaries alike. The plan he had set in motion was complex, requiring precision, secrecy, and ruthless efficiency. And yet he had underestimated her. He had believed she could be manipulated, captured, or neutralized. He had forgotten one immutable fact: Hart was a ghost, a force of nature that could not be controlled. She tapped a series of commands into a small device, accessing communications channels she had previously secured. Even in hiding, she had maintained contingencies, prepared for exactly this eventuality. Data flowed across the screen, intelligence on movements, personnel lists, operational objectives. The scale of Hale's operation was staggering but not insurmountable. She had survived worse. She had thrived under situations far more lethal, far more desperate. Watching silently, felt the weight of the moment settle on him. This was no longer a simple extraction. He was now a witness to the resurgence of a global conspiracy, one that had taken years to develop in the shadows. And at the center of it all stood Hart, a woman whose skills, intelligence, and resolve dwarfed any threat he had encountered. "Where are we headed?" he asked again, his voice quieter this time. "To the heart of it," she said. "Hale believes I am gone. He believes the ghost is dead. He is wrong. We strike first and we take control. You will follow my lead, Mercer, and you will survive if you do not falter." The snowstorm outside intensified, the flakes blowing across the windshield in chaotic patterns. Eyes remained focused, unwavering, scanning the terrain, plotting routes, anticipating obstacles. Every second brought them closer to confrontation, to the moment when Hale would realize his plans had unraveled. Shifted uneasily in his seat. He had never been part of anything like this. The stakes were immense, the danger palpable, and yet, despite the fear, there was a strange clarity. He could survive if he obeyed, if he stayed alert, if he allowed to guide him through the storm. Lessons learned too late could still save him if he paid attention now. Continued, voice calm, almost conversational, but edged with lethal certainty. "Hale underestimated the ghost," she said. "He underestimated the fear she inspires, the precision she wields, and the fury she can unleash. He believes in numbers, in networks, in control. I believe in skill, patience, and inevitability. Tonight, he will learn the cost of underestimating legends. As the vehicle carried them deeper into the storm, his fear was tempered by understanding. He was no longer the hunter. He was a witness, a participant, and a potential survivor. And Hart, the seal ghost, was the architect of his fate and of the fate of the man who had sent him. For the first time, understood the breadth of what he had walked into. The world was not simply dangerous. It was a chessboard and he had been a pawn. But the ghost was the queen, the force that could shift the game in an instant. And he had no choice but to follow. The storm outside raged, blurring the line between snow and shadow, chaos and control. Inside the vehicle, Hart prepared for the confrontation that would define the night, and perhaps the next chapter of her life. Hale's network would face a reckoning, and Mercer would learn what it truly meant to survive under the gaze of a legend who could not be controlled, contained, or predicted. The seal ghost was no longer a myth. She was here, and the conspiracy that had resurfaced would crumble under her precision, patience, and wrath. Tonight, the world would witness the return of a force that had been forgotten by history, but not by those who feared her. The night was a merciless canvas of darkness, blanketed in snow and shadows, as Hart maneuvered the unmarked vehicle through a network of back roads and abandoned paths. Hale's compound was heavily guarded, fortified not just with men but with technology, surveillance, and a labyrinthine security system designed to make infiltration nearly impossible, yet moved with the calculated ease of someone who had navigated far worse, a shadow among shadows, a predator among prey. Mercer followed silently, his nerves stretched taut. Every creak of the vehicle, every sudden movement of branches against the windshield made him flinch. He had seen combat, but nothing had prepared him for this, being hunted while knowing the hunter is the one in control. Calm only amplified his fear. She spoke little, letting the silence stretch as a weapon, forcing him to confront the gravity of the situation. "Listen carefully," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper cutting through the tense quiet. "Hale's compound is a fortress, but he relies on technology more than skill. Security cameras, motion detectors, armed guards on perimeter patrols. Our objective is simple: get in, locate the files, identify threats, and leave undetected. Any mistakes and you're dead. Understand?" Nodded quickly. "Yes, I understand." Glanced at him, noting the tension in his jaw, the wide eyes, and the slight trembling of his hands. He was terrified, and rightly so, but fear alone could be weaponized. She would need his fear, but she could not allow it to interfere with the mission. "Fear is natural," she said, almost casually. "Panic is lethal. Keep the first. Discard the second." The vehicle slowed as they approached the perimeter, a ring of harsh floodlights casting long shadows across the snow-dusted terrain. Guards patrolled in a meticulous pattern, a mix of human vigilance and automated surveillance. Hale had built an empire in shadows, but every shadow casts a flicker of light and knew exactly where to find it. She slipped out of the vehicle, moving with near-invisible precision. Hesitated, frozen for a split second, then followed her lead, his movements awkward but careful. The crunch of snow beneath their boots was subtle, minimized by careful placement and the muted texture of the frozen ground. His gaze darted constantly, taking in patrol patterns, camera placements, and guard rotations. She moved like a ghost herself, a whisper in the wind, leaving no trace of her presence. They reached a gap in the perimeter fence, a spot had identified from aerial surveillance data she had hacked hours earlier. With a few swift movements, she disabled the sensor, allowing them to slip through unnoticed. His pulse raced as adrenaline surged through his veins. Every nerve screamed at him, but composure steadied him. She was the eye of the storm, and he was caught in her gravity. Inside the compound, the scale of Hale's operation became immediately apparent. Men in tactical gear patrolled with purpose, armored vehicles lined the grounds, and surveillance drones buzzed silently above, yet moved with ease, exploiting blind spots, ducking shadows, and neutralizing minor security systems with a few swift keystrokes. Every movement was precise, every decision calculated. Hale had built a fortress, but he had not anticipated a ghost infiltrating his walls. Followed closely, doing his best to stay out of sight, to imitate her rhythm, and to keep his fear under control. His heart pounded with every step, but silent guidance and the small gestures she allowed him provided the framework he needed to survive. They reached the main building, a 3-story structure bristling with security cameras and reinforced doors. Crouched beside a service entrance, scanning the locks and motion detectors. "This is our point of entry," she whispered. "Stay close. Do exactly as I do. One mistake and it's over." With expert precision, she bypassed the electronic lock, a skill honed from years of counterintelligence operations. The door clicked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway lined with reinforced steel doors. His breath caught in his throat, each step echoing too loudly in his own mind. Moved forward, silent and deadly, every movement a lesson in control, patience, and lethal efficiency. They navigated the building with meticulous care, avoiding guards and cameras, and guided through a series of hallways and stairwells that seemed to twist endlessly. Every floor presented new challenges: locked doors, infrared sensors, patrolling guards with advanced weapons. Yet neutralized each threat without hesitation, her movements precise and silent, her mind calculating every risk and opportunity. Finally, they reached the secure server room. Crouched beside the reinforced door, her eyes scanning the keypad and security interface. Watched, captivated and terrified. She moved like someone performing a ritual she had repeated countless times, every action deliberate, every motion purposeful. Within moments, the door yielded to her skill, and they stepped inside a room filled with servers, monitors, and encrypted drives containing Hale's secrets. Accessed the network quickly, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced ease. Tried to assist, but she gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Step back, observe, learn, do not interfere." He nodded, barely breathing, as she pulled up files detailing Hale's operations, Black Ops missions, and plans to manipulate global power through clandestine networks. The data was staggering. Hale's reach extended beyond borders, operating in secrecy with operatives willing to kill, lie, and disappear without consequence. Eyes narrowed as she scanned the files, identifying key threats, vulnerable points, and the individuals orchestrating his empire. She memorized names, faces, and patterns, preparing for the precise strike that would dismantle the operation from within. Felt overwhelmed, the reality of the conspiracy settling like a weight on his shoulders. He had stumbled into a world far beyond contracts, weapons, and simple survival. Here, power and deception were tools, legends were alive, and one woman had the ability to rewrite the rules entirely. Finally stepped back from the terminal, her expression unreadable. "We have what we need," she said. "Now we move. Hale believes I am unaware. He believes he is in control. He is wrong. And when he realizes his mistake, it will be too late." His pulse raced, a mix of fear, awe, and reluctant respect. He understood now that the Seal Ghost was not simply a myth or a legend. She was an unstoppable force, a woman who had mastered every battlefield, every threat, and every deception. And he, for all his training and experience, was merely along for the ride. The sound of distant voices echoed from the corridor, signaling the approach of guards. Eyes flicked toward, silently communicating the next steps. They moved as one, shadow to shadow, silently neutralizing minor threats and avoiding detection with the precision of practiced professionals. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat mattered. Failure was not an option. As they approached the exit, paused, scanning the perimeter with lethal intent. "One final hurdle," she whispered. "Hale will not expect us this close. Stay alert, follow instructions, and survive." Nodded, understanding the stakes. They had infiltrated the fortress, uncovered the secrets, and navigated the deadly labyrinth of Hale's compound. But the final confrontation was still ahead, a confrontation that would test skill, courage, and the limits of survival. Outside, the storm raged, snow and wind obscuring the compound in a veil of chaos. and prepared to leave, carrying the knowledge, evidence, and leverage needed to dismantle Hale's empire. The night was far from over, and the danger had only intensified. The Seal Ghost had struck first, but the battle was not yet complete. Hale's world, built on manipulation and shadows, would soon collide with the precision, intelligence, and fury of Hart, and Mercer would walk the thin line between survival and annihilation, guided by the hand of a legend who could not be stopped. Hart paused outside the inner sanctum of Hale's compound, her senses alert to every nuance. The faint hum of electricity, the distant footsteps of guards, the subtle vibrations through the snow-covered ground. The server room had revealed the depth of Hale's conspiracy, the meticulous planning of his shadow network, and the lengths he was willing to go to manipulate both power and people. But the final confrontation, the moment where strategy met execution, was imminent. Mercer crouched beside her, trembling despite his attempts to suppress the fear. He had never faced anything like this before. Every step they had taken, every system they had bypassed, had brought him closer to the reality he had desperately tried to avoid. Hale was not merely a manipulator or a former mentor gone rogue. He was a mastermind, ruthless, calculating, and dangerous beyond comprehension. Studied the entrance to Hale's inner sanctum, noting the reinforced steel doors, biometric locks, and the subtle yet telling signs of hidden cameras. Her mind raced through contingencies, countermeasures, and escape routes. Years of experience, countless missions, and instinct honed to perfection guided her every move. She had dismantled operations far more lethal than this, but Hale's hubris and arrogance gave her the advantage. "You will stay quiet," she whispered too. "Any noise, any hesitation, and you are dead. Follow my lead exactly." "Yes, I understand," he replied, his voice barely audible, lips pressed tight against the edge of fear. Moved first, approaching the door with calculated steps. A combination of biometric manipulation and override codes allowed her to slip through the security measures undetected. Inside, the room was dimly lit, furnished with modern tech, surveillance monitors, and Hale himself, packing with the controlled arrogance of a man confident in his empire. Hale said, his voice calm, measured, yet laced with tension. He had underestimated her as he always did. "I thought you were gone." "Not gone," replied evenly, her eyes locking on his with unflinching intensity. "You should have known better than to underestimate the ghost." Hale's gaze flicked toward recognition and irritation mixing with his calculation. "And who is this?" he asked, masking the unease that had anticipated. "A tool," said simply. "Expendable until proven useful. He knows nothing beyond your instructions, which makes him dangerous only if you force him to be." Hale's eyes narrowed, assessing the situation. He had planned for threats, contingencies, even legendary operatives, but Hart was a force he could not control, predict, or manipulate. And though initially a pawn, was now a witness to the unraveling of everything Hale had built. "You've destroyed part of my network already," Hale said, masking frustration with composure. "And yet you're here alone. How do you expect to survive this?" Stance remained unwavering. "I do not need to survive this. I need to ensure you fail, and failure is inevitable." Hale's lips curled in a slight, menacing smile. "You've underestimated me before. You think you can dismantle my operations from the shadows, that a single operative, even one with your reputation, can undo years of planning." "Not from the shadows," replied, stepping forward. "From inside." Her calm contrasted sharply with Hale's escalating agitation. Every second he hesitated, every flicker of uncertainty gave her the advantage. Suddenly, guards appeared in the hallway outside, alerted by a silent alarm that had anticipated. Their movements were precise, tactical, but was faster, more lethal. In a blur, she neutralized the first two guards with swift, incapacitating strikes, her combat training evident in every movement. Watched in awe and terror, realizing that hesitation or panic would have been fatal. Hale's confidence wavered, though he masked it with a controlled breath. "You won't leave here alive," he said, drawing a concealed weapon, his reflexes honed by years of survival and strategy. His eyes narrowed. "Perhaps," she said, her voice steady, deadly, "but I will ensure you never control anyone again." The room exploded into motion. Training allowed her to anticipate Hale's movements, reading his body language, his breathing, the faintest cues. Overwhelmed by fear, froze in place, realizing that every step she took dictated life or death. Hale fired once, a warning shot, and ducked behind the server bank, pivoting smoothly to close the distance with lethal efficiency. Hale had underestimated her again. She was not a target to be neutralized. She was a storm, unpredictable and unstoppable. Each strike, each movement dismantled his confidence, forcing him to react rather than execute his plan. Still bound by fear, watched helplessly as advanced with precision, turning the tables entirely. Guards outside attempted to breach the room, but strategy had anticipated reinforcements. She disabled the secondary alarms with swift keystrokes and redirected security locks, trapping the intruders in a controlled zone, far from immediate harm. Hale realized with dawning horror that his empire was collapsing around him, not through brute force, but through mastery of strategy, patience, and skill. His confidence, the foundation of his control, crumbled. "You've underestimated what I am capable of," said, her voice calm, almost conversational amid the chaos. "This ends tonight, Hale. Your network, your operations, your manipulations gone, and you will answer for every life you endangered." Finally understood his place in the unfolding drama. He was no longer a contractor or a pawn. He was a witness, an observer of a force that comprehension. Survival depended on obedience, vigilance, and trust in a legend whose skill far surpassed his imagination. His hand moved with lethal precision, disarming Hale, neutralizing the immediate threat, and asserting dominance without unnecessary brutality. She restrained him with tactical efficiency, ensuring that he would have no chance to manipulate, escape, or retaliate. Every movement was methodical, calculated to achieve control without chaos. "You thought you could exploit me," she said, standing over him, eyes blazing. "You forgot one rule: never underestimate the ghost." Hale's smirk faltered, replaced by a thin veneer of fear. For the first time he realized that his plans, built over years, had unraveled in a single night. Watching silently, felt an unsettling mixture of relief and awe. He had survived not by skill, not by cunning, but by standing in the shadow of a legend who had mastered survival, strategy, and combat beyond comprehension. Hale, once a mentor, manipulator, and mastermind, was now helpless, ensnared by the very force he sought to control. The snowstorm outside continued unabated, but inside Hale's inner sanctum, the storm had shifted. Hart had reasserted control, dismantled the threat, and proven that some legends could not be contained, manipulated, or destroyed. And Mercer, shaken and forever changed, understood the true meaning of survival under the gaze of a living legend. Finally turned to him. "Lesson number 2, she said quietly, almost kindly, is that survival depends not just on skill, but on recognizing who truly holds the power. Remember it." Nodded, swallowing hard, every nerve still alert. He had pressed a gun to her head hours ago, believing himself in control. Now he understood the truth. Hart was the ghost, a force of nature, a legend, and he had been lucky enough to witness her reclaim dominance. Hale's empire lay in ruins, his arrogance undone, and the Seal Ghost had emerged victorious, calm, calculated, and unstoppable. Tonight Mercer had survived, but the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. The ghost was real, and she would not be underestimated again. The compound was silent now, the storm outside masking the remnants of chaos within. Hart moved through the inner sanctum with the same calm precision that had allowed her to dismantle Hale's operation. Guards had been neutralized, reinforcements trapped, and Hale himself restrained. a defeated shadow of the man who had once orchestrated global conspiracies from the shadows. Mercer followed, still shaken, his body and mind replaying every moment from the moment he had pressed a gun to head to the present. "You've done what?" finally whispered, disbelief lacing his words. His mind could barely comprehend the scale of what had just unfolded. How did you?" Held up a hand, motioning for silence. "Observation," she said simply. "Preparation. Anticipation. Every move, every reaction, every calculation. I planned for this long before you set foot in the compound. Hale thought he could manipulate me. He thought the ghost could be controlled. He was wrong." Nodded slowly, still processing. The adrenaline that had driven him moments ago was fading, replaced by exhaustion and awe. He realized now that survival wasn't about skill alone. It was about understanding who truly held power and how legends operated when unrestrained. Approached Hale, who slumped in his chair, his arrogance stripped away to reveal fear, frustration, and disbelief. "You underestimated more than me," she said quietly, eyes cold. "You underestimated consequences. You underestimated the reach of the people you've manipulated and the damage your ego causes." Hale's lips twitched, but no words came. For once, he had no strategy, no backup plan, no means of escaping the precision and dominance of the Seal Ghost. Every step he had taken, every manipulation he had orchestrated had led to this moment. Defeat not by brute force alone, but by strategy, experience, and the quiet inevitability of someone who refused to be controlled. Access the terminal, downloading incriminating files, evidence of Black Ops missions and Hale's covert operations. Every click of the keyboard, every flash of the screen, her victory. Hale's empire of shadows would be exposed, dismantled, and brought into the light. His network, once feared and untouchable, now lay vulnerable under the weight of truth and precision. Watched silently, understanding the magnitude of the operation. This was more than survival. This was justice, calculated, deliberate, and unstoppable. Hart was not merely a survivor of her past missions. She was a force reshaping the world, enforcing accountability in ways that few could comprehend. Once the files were secured, turn to. "You've seen what happens when someone underestimates power," she said softly. Lesson number 3. Survival is meaningless if you do not understand the stakes and the players involved. Nodded, still shaken, but he began to grasp the gravity of her words. He had survived the night not because of skill alone, but because he had witnessed a legend in motion, and that lesson would remain with him forever. With Hale incapacitated and the evidence in hand, moved toward the exit, her presence a silent warning to anyone who might consider challenging her. Followed, still trying to match her pace, still trying to reconcile the fear and awe swirling in his mind. The storm outside was fierce, but it was a small obstacle compared to the confrontation they had just survived. Outside, the wind cut through the air, carrying snow across the desolate terrain. Paused, scanning the horizon, her mind already calculating the next steps. Hale's downfall was secured, but the world was vast, filled with those who underestimated the ghost, and she would ensure they did not survive to repeat their mistakes. Shivered in the cold, yet he felt a strange sense of clarity. He had entered this mission as a pawn, unprepared and overconfident. He had faced a living legend, and he had survived. And now, he understood the true meaning of power, control, and the consequences of underestimating forces beyond comprehension. Glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "You will leave here and remember this night. Every lesson, every moment, every decision. It may save your life someday." "Yes," replied, voice steadying. The fear had not vanished, but respect and understanding now replaced panic. He realized that survival in her presence demanded more than reflexes. It demanded comprehension, humility, and recognition of the true forces at play. Moved again, blending into the storm with a precision that made her almost invisible. Followed her lead, keeping low, moving silently, until they reached the edge of the compound. Hale remained restrained inside, a testament to both his arrogance and the consequences of underestimating the ghost. "Do you ever stop?" asked quietly, voice barely audible over the wind. Paused, considering the question, though her eyes never left the horizon. "Legends do not stop," she said softly. "They adapt, they endure, and when necessary they vanish, leaving only the consequences of their actions behind." Understood. This was not just a mission. This was a demonstration of inevitability, of precision, of the raw force of someone who had survived countless threats and emerged stronger each time. He felt the weight of his own insignificance and the awe of witnessing a legend in motion. As dawn approached and returned to the vehicle, the storm had abated slightly, leaving a crisp, silent landscape in its wake. Handed a small device. "You will use this to report the situation. Ensure the files reach the proper authorities. And remember, never underestimate what you cannot see, never assume control where you have none." Nodded, the gravity of the responsibility settling on him. He had survived because he had witnessed the ghost, because he had obeyed, and because he had learned the lessons she deemed essential. Started the vehicle, but instead of joining him, she paused at the edge of the tree line, her figure blending into the shadows, almost ethereal. "This is where I leave you," she said. "Hale will be exposed and the world will begin to set things right. But I am elsewhere now. Do not expect to see me again. That is the way of the ghost." Before could respond, she vanished, slipping silently into the forest, leaving only footprints in the snow as evidence of her passage. The wind carried her presence away, and the snow erased her tracks quickly, as if the world itself sought to hide her existence from those unworthy of witnessing it. Sat in the vehicle, stunned, the weight of the night pressing on him. He had survived against impossible odds, faced a living legend, and witnessed the dismantling of one of the most dangerous conspiracies in recent memory. And yet, he understood something deeper. Hart was more than a soldier, more than a myth. She was a force beyond control, a shadow in the night, a ghost whose influence extended far beyond the reach of ordinary comprehension. The storm had passed. Hale's empire was crumbling, and Mercer would live, transformed, carrying the lessons of survival, power, and respect for legends. But Hart, the seal ghost, had already vanished, leaving behind only the inevitability of her legacy. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting pale light over the snow-dusted landscape, realized that some encounters change you forever. He had faced a myth, survived, and learned the truth. The ghost was real, unstoppable, and forever elusive. And the world, for all its dangers and conspiracies, would never see her coming, but would always feel the consequences of her presence. For those who underestimated her, there would be no second chance. And for those who survived her guidance, the lessons would resonate for a lifetime. Hart had struck once more, ensured justice, and vanished, leaving behind the echoes of a legend, and a world forever altered by the ghost who could not be captured, controlled, or forgotten.